So the first significant role that I did was in a miniseries called Separate But Equal about the Brown versus Board of Education case. This was, I think, 1989 or 90, something like that. And I played the youngest of the lawyers who worked for the NAACP under Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was played by an actor named Sidney Poitier. Yeah, that's what I said too. I was like 24 years old. I had just started acting. I think they gave me the role because I had a political science degree. Yeah, get him in there. Get in there, kid. See what you got. I showed up. I knew nothing about acting. Go watch the movie. It shows. All of these people were like, big deals to my mom. And so, yeah, that first role, she was really pleased at that. And she got to come down to Charleston and meet Sidney Poitier, too, as a perk.
It's a long award season. You kind of do have to protect this golden voice because there's lots of talking, lots of acceptance speeches to be giving. It's a lot.
This is a true story. Yeah. It has been a really interesting few months. It's been an interesting journey, a long, strange trip, but all good. It's a lot of talking. It's a lot of talking about oneself, which can be a slippery slope. But at the same time, it's been really gratifying to present this film to audiences. We think that it's a worthy film. We're proud of it. We're a small film. We shot in 26 days. We shot on a budget that was probably the equivalent of the catering budget for the last James Bond movie that I did. But we thought this was a timely story, a story that was smartly drawn, a story that is at the forefront of the American conversation right now, the issues that we're dealing with, conversations that are being had across the country but are not necessarily being had well. So we wanted to dive into this, and we wanted to do it and have a laugh at the same time because we're not afraid of these conversations. We're not afraid to talk about race. We're not afraid to talk about identity. We're not afraid to talk about representation and inclusion and all that stuff that we're all thinking about. What's the fear? Because or not all of us, but many of us want progress. So the only way we're going to do that is to get together and consider these things together and do it well and do it fearlessly. And so, yeah, this was a great story to tell right now. So I'm pleased that we have the opportunity to present it. And yeah, I don't mind talking about that stuff so much. Just don't want to talk about myself too much longer. It's a road to nowhere.
Well, this is going to be a tough 90 minutes for you then.
Yes.
But I want to ask you about those maybe fearless conversations that you might be having with audience members in these conversations after watching American Fiction. Has there been one of those interactions that really signaled to you that the audience is engaging in that way that you hoped?
Yeah. Here, the thing is that the social commentary, the satire is wonderful. The satire I describe in some ways as tragedy in disguise. Tragedy disguised as comedy because it's an absurd type of tragedy. But really, I think the most subversive aspect of our film is much simpler. It's the portrait of the family. So while all of these other strange tropes and strange misperceptions and stereotypes are dancing on one side, this man's life is kind of ordinary in its humanness, just trying to deal with the stuff that we all have to deal with. Responsibility to love, responsibility to family. Ultimately, he has to be caretaker to his mother, and that's just so plainly what it is. And that's who he is, despite how he's perceived. So the most really touching and kind of meaningful, well, I won't say most, but a lot of the meaningful stuff that people have said to me is, my mother had Alzheimer's. I really was moved by that because I had to do the same. We put our father in our home just yesterday, and I saw the movie, and it's really that. That's the universal space within this, and it's open to people across backgrounds. And in this case, it just happens to be a journey that's surrounded by, or undertaken by, by myself, by Sterling K. Brown, by Tracy Ellis Ross, Leslie Uggams, Myra Lucretia Taylor, but it's a family as insane as anyone's family.
You said that Monk is one of the more personal characters that you've played, maybe even the most since Jean-Michel Basquiat. What do you lead into that, or was there any part of that made you almost shy away from Monk?
Not then, but perhaps now. It's been interesting. It's been a really self-reflective process, making the film, and then these last months of talking about the film and getting it out. And I started to realize that there were maybe some subconscious things working at the time that I was filming it. There's another member of the family, for example, whose presence is felt heavily in the film, but who's not there. That's the father. And there's this, people are surprised at this kind of emotional vein that runs through the film. The trailer tells another story. The film is something else. That's showbiz. But there's this through line of unmanaged grief at work there that's sowing chaos here and sowing mistrust here, and is really stirring the pot in a way that's so subtle. And I think there were maybe aspects of that I was working from as well. Then there's other results of that kind of experience where someone finds themselves protective in ways that ultimately is not protective, as he is, and there may be a little of that in me as well. That I probably would be better avoiding. There's a lot of overlap. I'm not going to get into too much detail about that. But what I do appreciate very much about the tone of the film and about the trajectory of the character is that he changes. He's not the same man at the end of the movie that he is at the beginning. And he undergoes this process of self-reflection, and he's confronted by some of the women in his life and by his brother. And he's confronted by the madness of the world outside of him, and he listens, which is cool. And I think there's hope in that at the end of the film, he's at least considered opening himself up, not only personally, but also intellectually, in a way that I think is really healthy, not only for individuals, but for the collective. It's something that we seem to be experiencing now, repeating the same mistakes, generation after generation. Didn't we do that 20 years ago? Didn't we do that 100 years ago? Why are we here now? And there seems to be something almost innately human about not changing. You can go back and read. I'm doing a reading of the Trojan Women for this group called Theater of War in a few days around up at Columbia University, around some of the issues they've been having there and the dialogue around what's happening in the Middle East. And it's like, why can you go back and read a 4,000-year-old text and still find it relevant? Because we don't change. And it seems maybe we like kind of oscillate like on a sine curve, we just kind of, like the seasons. And we come back, I hope, to a balance. And maybe there's some incremental evolution, but it's not as much as we think. But what I love about this film and about the trajectory that Monk is on is that, yeah, maybe we can evolve. Maybe we can do better. Certainly a good message for me, and I think it's a hopeful one for audiences. So, did that answer your question?
It did, absolutely. And it brought me to another question as well, because what is something that is so interesting about each of your performances is that you do always seem to change. You always do seem to, in many ways, disappear into these roles. But we always, as audience members, know that the main kernel, the nugget of the excellence will be there. But you find a way to be a chameleon within each. How? I guess that's what we'll discuss over 90 minutes is how.
Oh. Well, a friend of mine back in New York in the early days used to say, if you can't beat them, confuse them. So I think I took that on as my creative mantra. Well, it really had to do with early influences, like Dustin Hoffman, is a big one. One man in Papillon, another in Marathon Man, another in Midnight Cowboy, and I just loved that aspect of the way he worked. Peter Sellers in Doctor Strangelove. I mean, he's like 5 men in the same room, and I just thought that was wonderful. I just thought it was magical, and when I set about wanting to be an actor, I wanted to build characters. I thought that was a big part of the work. Gary Oldman said something the other day about, because Gary was another big influence on me. When I saw Sid and Nancy, I was like, you mean we can go there? I thought it was, no, my performance in Basquiat is not the same without having seen what he did in Sid and Nancy, and then I had the opportunity to work with him. But he said something in Basquiat, but he said something the other day. He said that he liked to play characters because he would hide himself inside these characters. And he found that recently, he was terrified by the idea of playing someone that was more akin to who he was, that it was terrifying. That was interesting. And maybe there's something there for me. I don't know if I find it terrifying. I find it, in this case, really revealing and really it's been a deep process, I have to say. And there was an aspect to playing characters that would allow myself to find freedom under the mask. But that said, I do appreciate the craft of doing that. And it also allows me the opportunity for, I think, the expression of empathy, which I think is central to what we do. So, for example, with Angels in America, it took me a while. Thank you. It took me a while to get there. I remember when we were doing the play on Broadway, my first time working with George C. Wolfe, who has become, my dear friend, as well as, frequent collaborator and mentor and many things, godfather to my children. I remember one day in rehearsal, George said, well, first I said, George, I'm not quite comfortable just yet with, I'll get there. It was the first time for me doing the play. Marcia Gay Harden and I hadn't done it previously. Everyone else had. I'm not a gay man. I understand the fluidity of my sexuality, but I'm not a gay man. And they had experience with this play and lived experiences that were beyond mine. And I felt that I was being observed as opposed to rehearsing. And I said, yeah, George, I'm just not comfortable just yet. And he said, I don't want your comfort, Jeffrey. I want your talent. Okay. And so there was a process of finding myself inside this other skin. And I think there's something profound in that as well. It's not simply about hiding. It's about recognizing what the human genome map says, that we ain't so very different after all. And so, yeah, I enjoy it on multiple levels, kind of playing, just putting on, and it keeps me busy. I get a lot of work that way. I get to work across genres. I get to work in many different spaces, and I get to, maybe outwit the limitations, that are tried to be imposed upon me.
It's all about unlocking those different pieces and parts of the personality and the experience. And as you mentioned before, empathy. I do want to start with Angels in America and talk about that a little bit more, because of course you had the unique position of then reprising those roles again 10 years later. And so I'm always curious about that idea of, you're obviously playing these roles on Broadway. It's a 7-hour play,
Yes,
8 shows a week.
Yes.
But then you're doing it again in a different medium. So what did that experience, or rather those experiences, unlock in the craft?
Well, film acting is a curious thing. Film acting is very often the best you can do that day. And in some ways, it's kind of stunt work. You come in, boom, we're going to shoot this scene in 12 hours. And you're putting it out there for 12, and then you're moving on to the next stunt. And so sometimes you hit it. Sometimes you hit it the best you can. Sometimes there's something that you might have wanted to bring, a couple things you left back in the suitcase. In the theater, you revisit it. You get to go back every night. You hone it. You talk to the audience. They tell you what they like, what they respond to, what scares them in a good way. They tell you everything. And you have this immediate understanding. And the next night you go back and you say, yep. And you tweak that. You bring that around. If I did, yeah. So by the time you do that over the course of a 7-hour play for a year and a half, you know the play very well. So then when, 10 years later, they ask you to come put it on film, you said, well, I've had a great deal of rehearsal. Roll that camera, please. And also there was an opportunity, particularly with that play, to play that language in a different way, to play it in a much more intimate way for the camera, in a much more subtle way than you would be able to in the theater. For example, people ask, what's your favorite? I don't know what my favorite thing that I've done, but some of the best work, best work I've ever done is in that film, is in a scene with Al Pacino, the heaven scene, describing to him his afterlife. That when I got the invitation from Mike Nichols to do the role again, I could not wait to play that scene. That was everything. There are a couple of reasons for that. One, because it's the most lyrical, poetical, and potentially subtle piece of writing for me in the play, in the script, and also because we were rehearsing Perestroika one afternoon on Broadway, and Tony Kushner walked in to the theater and he said, Jeffrey, I've written something for you. And he handed me that piece. And I went, what? And I had been longing for something, a kind of weapon against Mr. Cohn, who was the monster that he was, and was looking for just something, because they had to be on equal footing, the two characters. And he gave me that, so that was mine. And so when it came time to do it on camera, it's funny. You talk about, 7-hour play and how long, that. But I was doing Top Dog, Underdog on Broadway. Oh, thank you. I was doing that on Broadway while we were filming Angels in America in the morning. My son was about 2 years old. I wasn't sleeping that much, and there were nights on stage where I literally had to say to myself, Jeffrey, do not fall over. You can stand. Yep. But because of the schedule, I would have to leave Kaufman Astoria Studios at around 6 o'clock. That was my cutoff, 6 o'clock. That was the deal in the afternoon so I could make it to the theater. And so be filming with Al Pacino, and Al Pacino does not go softly into the night. He dies with energy. His Mr. Cohn did. And so, we were working on that stuff. And it was about 5:15 in the afternoon, and we'd started filming that scene, and we got Al's coverage. And turned the camera around, and Mike Nichols said, Jeffrey, okay, we'll stop here because we have to turn around and want to give you time on the other side. So, you can make it to the theater. We'll stop here. I said, nah. I said, let's just do it. I said, it's not going to take long. And, because we had found the vibe. We were doing the dance together, and we were there, and it's hard to recreate that once you pull back from it, as you know. And so I said, no, just turn around. It's not going to take long. So he turned the camera around. I think we had about 25 minutes, before 6, and I did 2 takes and went to the theater. I think what's in the thing is the first take, but I'd had a lot of rehearsal. I couldn't wait. Such beautiful words, and relevant today. Still kind of the right-wing nightmare. But anyway, that's another story.
What do you remember about those 2 takes?
I just remember that the whole, as I interpreted that moment, it's just to be mesmerizing. It's just to mesmerize him. And just like a mouse in a cat's paw. And it's just poetry in action. That's what I remember about it. Yeah. And it felt that. Again, it's just delicious words and imagery and intention. And it was a beautiful gift from Tony.
And you describe Angels in America as kind of part of the epicenter of your career. This is a kind of role that has, or rather roles that have played such a large, maybe not, well, I guess kind of part in the trajectory, because it was right after finishing Angels in America that Basquiat began to circle towards you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, it really is the epicenter. It set the bar for me as to, the quality of work that could be done, the relevance of work that could be done. Kind of spoiled me, I guess, in that regard. It also was a marriage of, my two interests in storytelling and in the things political. So it's like, oh, wow, I get to do that too. Oh, cool. Okay, maybe I made the right choice. But the day that there were 3 of us, David Marshall Grant, Joe Mantello, and I, decided to leave the show at the same time, and we put in our letters of resignation that we were leaving in 30 days or whatever it was, and that was a matinee. I think it was a Sunday matinee. Put those in after the show. I went back to my apartment, for a bit of a break, and there was a message on my answering machine, my steam-driven answering machine that I had back then, and I hit the button, and it said, "Hey, Jeffrey, this is Randy. I'm helping this casting woman try to find someone to play Jean-Michel Basquiat, and I thought of you." And I said to myself, that's the next thing I'm going to do. It was literally the same day. And there's a friend of mine, Randy Sabusawa, who had been a producer for Abel Ferrar and other things, who I knew from the Upper West Side. Very good friend of mine. And he gave me a call. And I said, yeah, that's it. It took a little bit, took a while. I didn't have an agent at the time. That was complicated, but I had friends. I had gotten rid of my agent and I couldn't get an agent. I talked to 4 different agents. Even after I won the Tony, they all passed. After 4, I said, you know what? I don't have time to talk to these people anymore. So I did not, and that's how I got in touch with that project. And then, thanks. Yeah, ultimately, it led to a read-through of the script down at Julian Schnabel's place. And George Ann Walken was casting that with Sheila Jaffe, George Ann Walken, Chris Walken's wife. And she called me and she said, well, yeah, we want you to come down there. No, first she said, I remember she called me. What did she say? She called me and my roommate answered the phone. And she brought the phone to me. And she said, yeah, hi. We want you to come down for this read-through to read the role of Benny in Basquiat. I said, well, I don't want to read Benny. I want to read Jean-Michel. Well, now you're going to. She said, and further, listen, before you get. She said, don't tell your roommate, or tell your roommate that when people call you at 3:00 in the morning, he should not say that you're asleep. Because I was asleep. And I said, well, is Chris going to be down there? Is he going to be down there for the read-through? He said, and don't call my husband Chris. And I said, well, I was in a play with him. I kind of know him. I'd been in a he did Othello in Central Park, and I was the third stone from the left. But so I knew him, and he was really wonderful to me. But anyway, I ultimately went down to that read-through. I agreed to come down, and I did read the role of Benny, which ultimately Benicio del Toro did in the film. But I read the role of Benny as I would read Jean-Michel Basquiat. There was another guy playing J.M.B., but I got home a couple of hours after the read-through, and Julian called me and asked me if I wanted to talk about playing that role. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll do that. I'll talk about that. So, yeah, eventually we got there.
I mean, they do say, dress for the job you want, and in some ways act for the job that you want.
It's all an opportunity, yeah. But there was just something that told me there was an inevitability to it. Yeah, and, I guess the old military people say shape the battlefield. So I guess that's what I tried to do.
What did tell you that there was that inevitability? So when you get that voicemail and you hear you say that's the next thing I'm going to do, what was it? Because even in that moment, you don't know, the take on this role. You don't know how we're portraying him. You just know somewhere deep in you that this is who you want to portray next.
Well, I knew a bit about his story. I knew the spaces that he inhabited. When I moved to New York in mid-1988, my first place was on the Lower East Side, 10th and D, like deep alphabet city. And that's why I came to New York, though. I came to find that part of the jungle. And it was so exciting. It was so creative. It was so free. I was just there waiting to go to NYU to grad school. But I knew the terrain, and I understood what it was like to be someone who was, reasonably creative and wandering the town in that way. And that was his territory. And I also knew a bit about his work, his language, his poetic language, his visual language, and it spoke to me. It pulled from resources that I think I pull from. References to Muhammad Ali and Miles Davis and undiscovered genius of the Mississippi Delta. And I just, we spoke a similar language. And the more I got to study him and dig deeper, the more I just came to love him. But even at that moment, at that time, I felt, it just, I don't know, there's levels to this thing. Your mysteries involved. In fact, a couple of years after the film came out, I was at a party up like up in Harlem somewhere. And I had a roommate in that apartment on the Lower East Side, that first apartment. Her girlfriend was a photographer and had some addiction issues. And she ran into me. She said, "Jeffrey, I cannot believe it. Ever since I saw that movie, I have been looking for you." She said, "You have no idea. When you were on the 4th floor in our apartment, hanging out, the cats and whatever else were going on." She said, "Jean-Michel Basquiat was on the 1st floor all the time because there was a dealer there. And according to her, he was copying there." He passed away very shortly after I moved to New York. I moved to New York in July of 1988. He passed away in mid-August. But there was, there was shared space.
There's those energies sometimes in life that kind of draw you in the same vein, and you don't even know, you don't even realize that you're kind of on those parallel paths and moments, and that is feels like one of those moments.
Well, I think there's a trajectory. There's a pathway from him and that film to this film, to American Fiction. I consider them kind of bookends in storytelling in a narrative sense, but also, first lead, latest lead in a film. But, there's similar ideas at the core. Just a man trying to be his man, his own man, expressing himself as he sees fit, based on his mind, his heart, his experiences, his history, his interests, trying to be creatively and intellectually free against the resistance. There's a line in Basquiat about his is the voice of the gutter, and there's a line in American Fiction, language of the gutter. It was just there. It was just, that's just a kind of small Easter egg, but there's a good deal of overlap between these two men and these two films, I think.
I'm curious, what did your process look like then when you were, as you were saying, kind of tapping into his story and trying to discover who he was? What were some of the kind of key things that you needed and were looking for?
Well, I think the primary thing, or the central thing, was really provided, I have to say, by Julian Schnabel. He let me into his studio at any time, and I just go in there and paint all day for about 6 months prior to going into production. I just paint. Sometimes there'd be about, I remember one day, it had to be at least 12.5 real Basquiat pieces lined up around me, because the producers at the time were also collectors. So they had kind of accelerated their collecting prior to that film coming out. And I would look, and I would take like an image from one and an image from another, and try to create my own kind of Frankensteinian, versions, and just kind of immerse myself, just obviously so I'd have facility with a brush and comfort with it, but also it was more introduction to his language and all of that, and just finding his space. That was the one thing. But the thing that I was able to do back then that becomes harder as you get older, and you have like kids who like insist on your attention. Is I could think about a role for 24 hours back then, or however long I was up. I could, and I did with that. I mean, I was young and free, and I'm just thinking about him all day long, and I'm reading everything that I can read, and I'm watching every interview that I can get my hands on, and I'm studying every piece of work, stacks of his books, just combing through, like trying to divine him out of his work, because he's such a comprehensive, brilliant, complete artist that it's all there, and you can kind of see, as he gets more, more kind of pulled away by this drug. You can see the thinness. You can see like kind of the blood start to go out of some of the work. It gets thinner. It gets but whereas, there's a period where it's super vibrant, super blood filled and just, but yeah, so I was really wanted to see if I could find him in his work, because that's the type of artist I think he was. But yeah, a lot of time. It was so good. Gone are the days.
What do you do now? Because as you said, I mean, part of it is obviously the facility, like you've learned how to maneuver and figure out things sometimes on a faster timetable. How do you start now as you're kind of pulling into the process of a character, and you maybe don't have 6 months to paint and instead have 6 weeks before you start a project?
It varies. My method is just to be open to the given circumstances and to be as fluid as I possibly can. With American Fiction, the script was just, rich with the detail and information. I started to read the book. Cord really, it's based on a novel by Percival Everett called Erasure. Cord really reshaped a lot of the catalyzing moments in the book in his own image. The book's set in Washington, D.C., where I grew up. We shot in Boston. The sister in the book is murdered by an anti-abortion activist in our film. She has a heart attack. There were a lot of moments that were reconsidered. So I stuck more closely with the script and really with the book of my own life. There was not a lot of friction in kind of inserting myself into these circumstances, as I described. And yeah, it just went up there and 6 weeks. No, maybe we had 6 days. We didn't have rehearsal. Just went up there and I tried to find the tools that I needed, wanted to understand what Cord, his kind of cinematic vision, and, found the right shoes. I went to Macy's. I think it was the morning of. I was trying to find the glasses because I wanted him to have glasses, and they gave me 50 wonderful crew up in Boston. Props people, wonderful, but I just didn't find the right glasses. And I think for some reason we started filming late that first Monday, like 9 o'clock or something, maybe even a little bit later. It was a really late day. And I had been combing around the department stores all over Boston looking for glasses. And I think it was a Macy's over by Faneuil Hall. I found these glasses and I was like, okay, yeah, we're good now. Let's go to work. And, it was just finding that stuff and then kind of bringing my stuff to the table and going after it.
Do you have any other sort of favorite talismans for some of your characters? Any other, because that's part of the thing sometimes is finding that, real physical something to grasp onto about some of these folks.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. For me, it's all about convincing myself first. If I can convince myself, then I can convince someone else. So, I mean, any particular one from any particular film? I'm not sure any particular I mean, there's always something. Like in the French Dispatch, I mean, the real talisman for me, ultimately, is the script. Like, Wes Anderson wrote that script, that piece with me in mind as well, as Cord said. And Wes said, we had a meeting. He was living in Paris at the time. I happened to be going over there. He called me and, said, we'd like to meet. I said, I'm going to be in Paris. He said, well, let's have lunch. So we went to have lunch at this place on Saint-Germain. And as it turned out, it was a place that James Baldwin used to frequent, which was fitting. And he talked to me about this film and the idea, and he said, and he described to me the character. He said, I don't have the scriptures. I'm going to send it to you in 2 weeks. Typical Wes. It's not quite finished. which he did. But when he sent that to me, oh man, it was, again, beautiful pieces of writing that anyone's ever given me. That was The Talisman. And when I read that piece, it was like hearing a song on the radio for the first time, and the melody stays in your head immediately. It was almost like it's almost like the character, he describes himself as having a typographical memory. It was just right in, just again, well, I don't know, it's just a piece of music that I love to play. Just the language, the irony. I really get Wes's language as well. He's so precise with a comma. I love that. Love it. And so in the best instances, the Talisman is the script and the character itself.
I love that you say that, because what does that kind of allow for you when you have a script that is so precise with the way that its language is? Because, I mean, of course, at times I'm sure you want the freedom and the ability to improvise and riff and work and kind of change dialogue.
If you don't have to, don't do it.
That, I think, is the point. When you have someone like Wes who you hadn't worked with before that moment, but plays your language and you didn't know it yet, to be able to build that collaboration and continue on and make more films together. What is it like to find those other creatives that are playing the same way?
Yeah, when I met him, obviously we had lunch, but when I'd seen his films, but when I saw that script, this is really smart. This is really well considered. The architecture of this story is clear to me. It's not by accident. It's intentional. And that's cool. And that's the way he works. That's the way, a lot of, great directors work. Wes is particularly specific, but he's right. When I look at his script, I go, oh yeah, I understand your math. I understand why it is thus. And that's cool. And then when he gets, you get on set and it's similar, very specific. But there are always limitations. There are always parameters set on you. You can't do anything within a frame. You find your freedom within the given scene, the given frame, the given circumstances. So Wes creates kind of a diorama. It's a very specific thing. And the camera, he's got, you're dancing with the camera crew. Everybody's moving, there's like dolly tracks on tracks and, Sanjay's there. But there's freedom in that because it's there. They do everything. Wes does everything. The crew does everything except give life to the words, to perform it. And interpret it. And that's our gig. So there's really infinite possibilities within that. You just have to go after them, make them. Yeah, you can feel constricted in any circumstance, I guess it's all in the mind, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful stuff to play with. Yeah, I dig it.
What do you remember about finding that freedom for the first time? Yes, please.
It bugs me too. You see all this stuff out there about Wes hiring people, and people go off about, when's he going to hire black actors? All this stuff. And I get it. But also, that dude gave me one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that I have ever received about an expat black writer based loosely on James Baldwin, a little bit of A.J. Name escapes me right now. And he even mentioned a little bit of Tennessee Williams thrown in there, but he wanted me to play that, one of the most beautiful pieces of writing that I've ever received. I mean, anybody who's critical of not hiring, like, more black actors, if you can't appreciate that, you ain't gonna appreciate anything. And yeah, you can hire who he wants to.
But we do like to see him hire you time again.
Yeah,
the collaboration we enjoy.
I don't mind that either.
Well, I want to go back because you did, of course, mention being born in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's it.
Anybody else? Any more D.C. up in here?
There we go.
Curious. When you look back on D.C. and how D.C. shaped you as an actor, I mean, you've discussed, obviously, you went to school, initially studied political science. All of those things we can kind of see in the work, especially in the work as activism in certain ways as well. But what would you say DC gave you as a performer?
Well, I loved growing up in DC. I absolutely loved it. I wouldn't trade it for any other place in the world, except maybe like Honolulu. But but no, DC was such, I think in some ways, misunderstood town. Yeah, it's obviously the center of the government and all of that, politics and all. But particularly when I grew up in the 70s, 80s, rich cultural underbelly there. One, like probably the two, central towns for the emergence of punk rock in America, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Washington, D.C. Bad Brains, Henry Rollins' Minor Threat, of course, Go-Go. When rap was happening, it was go-go. I call it Afro-Potomac rhythms, those polyrhythms, like particular to it only there. You had that bubbling up. Gil Scott-Heron. You go to Mr. Henry's on Capitol Hill where Roberta Flack got started. Marvin Gaye, go back to Duke Ellington. You have, there was just like such, there was just one, and it comes from the people. I grew up, it was Chocolate City. It was like 74% black. And so you had, this one type of power, and then you had another type of power. You had this kind of political power and all of this, but then you had this cultural power there too that was really a smart mix. It's a smart town. People come to D.C. because they want to work for the government. They want a government job with benefits and all of that. They want to serve most often. People confuse politics and government. The politicians are not the government. And there's a difference. Government is the mechanism. Politicians are the fuck-ups who come in, wrenches into things. But the government in and of itself is a useful tool. Go to a place where there is a failed government. You have a much deeper appreciation for what we have. But I digress. So people come to D.C. because they're educated, they're smart, they want to serve, they want, these good jobs. And so it's a smart town. And it offers everything. And so, the beginnings of acting for me, even though I was, my mom was, doing the work that she did, a lawyer for the government, but she would take me to the theater. Everything that toured, she would take me to at the Ford's Theater, all that history there. You'd look up in the balcony, that's where he was. And National Theater, Warner Theater, and I would go see a range of things, everything from Annie to The Wiz to For Colored Girls, Ntozake Shange's play. I saw a one-man show that James Whitmore did called Give 'Em Hell, Harry. It's a one-man show that Avery Brooks did on Paul Robeson. I saw Bubbling Brown Sugar. There was a musical about the White House. I think it was 1776. Everything. She just took me to everything. And I remember from a very young age, and I remember vividly I'd be in we would often sit in the mezzanine, like the first row, best seats, looking down, see everything. And I remember vividly, the curtain would go down at the end of the show, and I was convinced, my 8-year-old brain was convinced, absolutely convinced, that the world of the play went on. And I wanted to go back there. And so the seed was planted, and it kind of slowly germinated until, I was in college, and it sprouted out of the side of my head, and I started to act on it. And I took an acting class and did a play, Wallace Terry, based on Wallace Terry's book Bloods, about Black Vietnam veterans. And that was it. But DC, it all came from DC, and most specifically from my mom, of course. Yeah.
Before we talk more about your mom, I do want to talk about Bloods and being on that stage and kind of jumping into this for the first time. You know, what do you remember about that seed sprouting out? And, you know, because you were on a different path. Yeah. And that experience made you change to be where we are now today.
Well, yes and no. The experience that really shifted it for me was like kind of the first day I took a class. It was a class with this guy, this teacher. He had gone to Yale. I think his name was Walter Boughton. He had been the understudy for Burl Ives and Cat on a Hot Tin Roof on Broadway. He was an Amherst grad, and he was teaching at school. And I think we did some Chekhov shorts or something like that. And like the first time I got up and performed, I was like, yeah, like the first day. It's like, I think I found something that made sense in a way that nothing else did. I don't think I couldn't quite picture myself being in an office. Not that there's something like bad about that, but I didn't see myself fitting in that space. I didn't, I just wanted like kind of a wider playground, I guess. But then during that play, that really kind of set in, because the people ask you what your first big break is. I think your first big break is when you get on stage and nobody throws rocks at you. That's it. Nobody throws bananas at your head. You know, that's it. It all begins from there. There's no, who did you know? How do I get it? No, dude. Just do a play. Just do a thing. Just do it. And one thing will take care of the other. It will all flow from there. But yeah, it was, I did that. Oh God, I was such a knucklehead. I would remember it was in a black box theater, like behind the snack bar at school. And I was so wound up, man. I was back there, I was in the corner. Don't talk to me. You can't talk to me. I was so wound up. But instead of throwing things, people kind of leaned in, like, oh man, that was really moving. And yeah, that was it. Here we are.
I mean, that's the kind of feeling that you're right. You never really forget, because first it does start with you and you're like, oh wow, I love this. But then when other people see it and say, no, we also see the talent, we see what you see as you're performing it, that there's a real feeling of like recognition that happens.
Well, there is that whole idea behind this stuff of connecting with an audience. So if you don't connect with the audience, you might be spinning your wheels a little bit. Yeah, I mean, that's critical to it all, is being able to transfer something, whether it's information or emotion or feeling or whatever it is. That's what it's all about.
I want to go to a very important audience for a moment and speak about your mother. Because I know she has been and your aunt have been very important parts of this process for you. You lost your mother shortly before this film, before American Fiction, the script came to you. And I know your son put it very beautifully, and you've spoken so wonderfully about how this has also been a beautiful homage to her. So as you kind of look at your career through that lens, what does it mean to have, gone after this dream and embodied so many of these? Well, really, each one is its own dream. In largely, I would imagine, largely also in honor of her.
Well, I mean, what else do we do? I mean, my son did say that it was really so right. But I mean, gosh, in some ways, everything I do is, let me rephrase that. But whenever I work, whenever I do something creative, constructive, it is in some part homage to her. This is more specifically in that it is a story about a man and his relationship to his mother, among other things. But yeah, my mom was a badass, man. I mean, she was the architect of my possibilities. And I would hope for everyone that they would have that type of guidance. Maybe not so heavy-handed as my mom sometimes. She had expectations. She was tough. Being raised by 2 women. Ooh, baby. That's like being raised by 18 men sometimes. But at the same time, she threw like, she had a green thumb too. She chopped down like, brush over there, right there, all across, and there were pathways that she put in front of me. Each one of those pathways led to opportunity. Everyone. I had, I was a jock. I was an athlete. I was playing football from the time I was like 8 years old, Went up to a school once to play played in the Police Boys Club League back in D.C. I played at this team. Man, we used to practice on a median strip in the middle of New York Avenue, number 2 Boys Club. It barely fit all of us. We didn't have uniforms, And man, when the game time came, you got your helmet, and then you'd have to give your helmet to the older guy on the team above you because, we didn't have a lot of resources. That year, I think it was like 68-pound football. We lost every game. We didn't score 1 point. But one day we went up to this place and we went out, we got on the bus, we walked out, we saw these athletic fields. I'm like, what? Is that actual grass? There are no stones here. And there's another field on the other side, and there are tennis courts there, there's a baseball diamond here. And what is that thing? There was this massive cathedral, Gothic cathedral, like in a shadow cast over them. I'm like, what? And we went out in that field, and we lost that game too. But afterwards, I said to my mom, I said, what is this place? And she said, that's St. Albans School. And I said, I want to be here. And she said, well, if it's good enough for the Kennedys, it's good enough for you. Yes. And she said, do you want to apply? I said, I do. And so I applied, I got in. And again, Mom was like, which way do we go? Let's go. That's it. But she got that, from her parents and from an aunt of hers as well. In the book that American Fiction is based on, the father comes from a generation of professionals. The mother comes from somewhere south of their beach home on the Chesapeake, working class, rural folks, a little bit of intra-family class tension there. She, the mother in the movie, in the book, is the first to be college educated in her family. That was my mother and my aunt. My grandfather was a waterman, oysterman, crabber, farmer, sold whiskey, made whiskey, sold it, pitched in the Negro Leagues, baseball. He said he pitched against Satchel Paige, but remember, he was a fisherman, so, you got to... And when the whiskey got, the tails got, but he was incredible. He was everything. He was manhood to me. I mean, worked, man, from 4:30, he was gone. 4:30 in the morning, he was gone. He was out on the Chesapeake. Then he'd come back, he'd sold his seafood, his catch on the dock, and then he'd come home, he'd grab a quick bite, he'd hop on the tractor, he'd go out in the field, then he'd come back and he'd sell everything at the house and whiskey. He was just nonstop badass. I loved him to death. But my mom got a lot from him, work ethic wise, but also, here's the secret too. We're not talking about acting so much, but it relates. This is where I get this is my stuff. It relates in terms of how I act, how I work. He had an aunt who lived in Brooklyn, in Bed-Stuy, who kept house, like Lorraine in the movie, for a family there. I always wondered why my mother and my aunt made matzo ball soup growing up. They learned it from their Aunt Bessie, who kept house for a Jewish family in Bed-Stuy. I think the father was a congressman or something like that. Anyway, Bessie, she was, story about her, tough. But she said to my grandfather, she said, have those children come up to Brooklyn, come up to New York to go to school. Better they're educated here than in the schools of the segregated South. And so my aunt went to Girls High in Bed-Stuy, and my mom came up from middle school in Williamsburg. But that was kind of the difference maker. They were the only two of their siblings that came up. And that was kind of a difference maker, but it came from my grandfather, who, he began working when he was, I think, 14, maybe at the latest, because his father died, I found out from Skip Gates, of influenza during the pandemic of 1918. So, but he was insistent that his children not face the same educational limitations. He was also insistent about citizenship. He got to vote, and he would put on his hat, his fedora, and go to vote. But this stuff is what was passed down to me through my mother in terms of these opportunities and what she recognized as a pathway to opportunity. And it's also what feeds into the way that I work. It feeds into why I appreciate Wes Anderson's scripts, because I love the way he writes, because it was hammered into my head, an appreciation of language and a love of language, not just in school, but also back at my grandparents' house, listening to the stories that were told, hearing the music of the American South as expressed through language, being able to distinguish that musical language from the musical language that I heard in prep school, from the musical language that I heard in Southeast DC, and always having to be attuned to these different American dialects. And I think it goes back as well to my interest in characters and distinguishing them. Yeah. Just, I don't know, maybe happy circumstance, just the, born, everything is born of the conditions in which we find ourselves. And yeah, I guess they were somehow, oddly enough, fertile ground for this type of work.
I mean, remember how I asked at the beginning of this, how you disappear into every role? I think that is how.
Well, it's part of it. I've always, and I tell my kids this, to try to condition yourself to be comfortable in all rooms, not be afraid of any room or intimidated, but flow, because why not?
I have one more question to ask you about your mother. Do you remember a role that she got particularly excited about?
Yes. Many. But, well, I've said this before, she was a little confused by my decision to want to become an actor, and then actually like pursue it. When I won the Tony, she was more convinced that things would turn out okay. But it was even before that she got excited. It was the first role that I had when I did Separate but Equal. Did I talk about that earlier? So the first significant role, I've done a few of these in the past, and I try to remember what I said, when and where. So the first significant role that I did was in a miniseries called Separate but Equal, about the Brown versus Board of Education case. This was, I think, 1989 or 90, something like that. And I played the youngest of the lawyers who worked for the NAACP under Thurgood Marshall. I played a guy named William Coleman, who later would be Secretary of Transportation, I believe, under Ford. Anyway, I played him. Thurgood Marshall was played by an actor named Sidney Poitier. Yeah, that's what I said too. I was like 24 years old. I had just started acting. I think they gave me the role because I had a political science degree. Yeah, get him in there. Get in there, kid. See what you got. I showed up. I knew nothing about acting. Go watch the movie. It shows. Man, and my first like single shot, and not even a close-up. Don't get too close. It was like, it was opposite Sidney Poitier. And I'm like, wow. And one of the other lawyers was Spotswood Robinson, who went on to be a federal judge. I think Cleavon Little played Spotswood Robinson, but he had been a dean at Howard Law School when my mother was there. So all of these people were like, big deals to my mom. They were big presences in her life, all of them. And so, yeah, that first role, she was really pleased at that. And she got to come down to Charleston and meet Sidney Poitier, too, as a perk. So, gradually winning her over to this idea that this might be a valid occupation for me.
What was it like to introduce your mom to Sidney Poitier?
Oh, that was cool. That was cool. And he was amazing. He was so gracious, so generous, so patient with me, and so just so full of grace, naturally. We're able to do this work in American fiction with a type of freedom and with a type of freedom. Because a lot of the battles have already been won. Sometimes we get in our own way. Sometimes we can internalize the limitations. Man, what am I going to sit here and complain about? All I have to do is look back and see not only who did it, when they did it, but how they did it. With supreme talent, supreme grace. And they weren't to be stopped. So I'm not here without that work, but then specifically in my career, I started with it. It was just crazy. It was just crazy, a crazy gift. And Cleavon Little was in that, as I think I might have mentioned, and a guy named Albert Hall. Albert Hall was chief in Apocalypse Now. Man, oh man. I'd seen Apocalypse Now, I don't know how many times. I don't know, a lot. And I told him so. And I was just so, man, can we talk about the scene? Okay. So what happened when Chef goes off to get the mango? It's just everything. And at the end of the shoot, he gave me a gift. He handed me a book, the autobiography of a yogi. I still have it. And the inside flap, he wrote, "Jeffrey, evolution is when a kid comes up to you and says, 'Jeffrey, I like your work. I've seen your film 50 times. Your friend always, Albert. I was at something the other month and all this. This young actor goes, man, I have your poster on my wall. Another thing, he says, I watch that movie so often because I want to see the tales that want to da. And I'm like, thank goodness I have evolved. But I think of Albert, and I'm always surprised at it. I think of that note from Albert. And ideally the evolution continues because it's needed. But yeah, that was a special start, and my mom was okay with that one because of the nature of the story.
I love that the evolution is continued, but in many ways the goal, the mission has stayed the same. I'm sure you've seen it a million times lately because I'm sure everyone's bringing it back up. But in your Tony speech, you talk very specifically about how all that you wanted is to stretch creatively and at the same time to be intentionally political and fight the good fight. That's all that you wanted to do as an actor. And that's what we see. When you look back at the filmography, you've stayed dedicated to that ideal.
Well, cool. Cool. Well, thank you. I mean, that's what I wanted to do. Those were my interests. Fuck them if they can't take a joke. Those are my interests. That's the music I want to play. Some people want to play banjo, bluegrass. Cool. I love bluegrass. Somebody wants to play Tchaikovsky. Go for it. Love him too. This is the kind of music I like to play. That's what I like to do. I love this film that we did. I love that it's relevant. I love that it's topical. I love that it's aspiring to do something in the moment. And I love that it's funny at the same time, that it's buoyant. Mel Brooks, the other day at an event, said, satire is nothing if it's not political. If it's not socially relevant, it's nothing. What's the point? Yeah, I love the films of the 70s. That's what I was introduced to. The first film that I ever saw in the theater was Dog Day Afternoon. Sidney Lumet. Adult film. I was 8 years old. And man, I came home cursing a storm, man. But those films. Another early film that I did was with Alan Pakula, All the President's Men. That was like mainstream stuff. Talking about what was happening in the day and doing it, with smart material and doing it because there was a care to do it and there was an audience for it. There still is. Yeah, that's just why I was, I thought it was supposed to be done. And yeah, I enjoy it.
Well, I want to talk about some of the other works as well. And we're going to go in just kind of whatever order, but I wanted to speak about Rustin.
Oh, cool.
Real quick. Because there's so many things that film and that performance encapsulates. Obviously, another wonderful collaboration with George C. Wolfe, and also kind of a continuation of telling those stories of a different of those people who kind of plowed the way for us. When you look at a film like that and an opportunity like that one was, what does stand out the most about that experience of being, and also of being there in D.C. to be able to recreate some of those just incredible moments?
I didn't film in D.C. They did film there, but not. I was in Pittsburgh. That was Harlem as Pittsburgh. I was, only interiors for a couple of scenes, just come in and be villainous and oily and then duck out. But, yeah, I mean, that story is, man, the relevance of that story is, I think, should be pretty obvious. I think we live in a time right now where there's a good deal of hopelessness, potentially. There's a bit of apathy even. There's confusion as to how to move forward. There's a divisiveness. And what that film really is about is the architects of the legislative change that led to real progress in this country. There's a backlash to some of that progress now. There are kind of very cynical interpretations of that progress. You look at the recent decision of the Supreme Court regarding affirmative action as reverse racism, as though there wasn't an attempt over many generations and centuries to keep Black people confined to a permanent underclass in this country by design. And as well, I saw an interview with Edward Bloom, who is the legislative strategist, the architect of this backlash. He's the one who recruited those Asian students after he failed in Texas. At the University of Texas, he had a plaintiff who was a young white woman whose grades weren't so impressive, and lost that case. Anyway, this guy's Edward Bloom. Look him up. He said that he used Martin Luther King's strategies, right, as a blueprint for the work that he's currently doing to undo the progress of the civil rights movement. I thought it was the most cynical thing I've ever heard anyone say out of their mouth. There's been more, but ooh, man. Anyway, our film is a reminder of why and how that work was done. Because the work goes on. We go back and forth. We oscillate back and forth. But it's about strategizing. It's about assembling an army, and about driving change, and about using the mechanisms of government and the law, which are still in place in this country, to expand rights to all of us and to undo historical wrongs that you can only perceive as not existing if you ignore the history, which is why there's this movement not to read the history. Because if you read the history, then you'll know what happened and you'll understand why the injustice. But if you don't read the history, you could just blame it on the individual and say it's the individual's fault. Because and it just kind of, asserts this feeling of superiority and all that stuff. But anyway, the film, these films are, I think, important to remind us of who we are, how we got here, and what we might be able to do. And George Wolfe is one who is a kind of creative caretaker in many ways of our history, particularly as it relates to the struggle of Black folks in this country. One of the things that he says very often, he says, respect the source. Respect the source. And so, you look at Bayard Rustin, what he represented as the man who influenced King on these strategies of nonviolence, as well as being the mastermind, the architect of the enormous logistical exercise that it was to march on Washington. My mother marched on Washington. My aunt did not, because she was at the hospital, at DC General Hospital, in case she was needed. But that was a role that I've probably been rehearsing for in some way for a long time, because Adam Clayton Powell had a big presence in our house. And in fact, I couldn't figure out if I was going to be able to do that role because my schedule was pretty tight. I was doing Westworld. I had gone away to do Asteroid City in the middle of Westworld. And I was dealing with affairs down in D.C. at my mom's place. And I had a couple of days off. I managed to get down there. There needed to be some work done down in the basement. A relative of mine, my godbrother, had gone down. He was helping me out. He was pulling stuff out of the basement to make room for this work. My mom had a wonderful collection of things, of books, magazines, records, incredible records. Some of my best records in my collection are from her. Miles Davis, Live Evil. I got that from my mom. Like incredible stuff. Anyway, I go down there. He's pulled everything, my godbrother, and put it in the living room. I put the key in the door. I open the door. I walk in, and the first thing I see staring at me from the sofa is Adam Clayton Powell with his finger pointed at me like this. It was the cover of an album that was a collection of his speeches called "Keep the Faith, Baby." And I called George Wolfe. I said, "George, you're not going to believe what just happened." He said, "Yes, Jeffrey, that's your mother telling you to do my movie." I said, "Okay, I guess I'm in." And we figured out the schedule. But and Powell was, what a character. Part political shaman, part political showman. But super powerful. He had been elected in 1941 and served until the early 70s. If you want to have some fun, listen to some of the phone conversations between him and Lyndon Johnson. Because Johnson was recording his phone conversations. Oh man, there's some delicious stuff. Then go check out Lyndon Johnson ordering pants. Oh my God. If you've never heard that, please check that out. It's the funniest thing. There's nothing funnier than Lyndon Johnson ordering pants. But Powell was super dynamic, super charismatic, super powerful. And yeah, he felt threatened, politically in terms of who are these upstarts? I mean, he was the first black representative elected from the North. And I think there were a couple who were elected during Reconstruction. Most of the senators back then in the South Mississippi, they were appointed. I think there were a couple of reps who had been elected. But he might have been the first in many years after the backlash to Reconstruction, which is similar to the backlash we're facing now. But I mean, he was a singular guy. And man, go watch some of his speeches. Oh, he was putting it on. So super fun to play. And yes, a character and a presence that I had been aware of for some time. And a delicious villain and, to sink one's teeth into.
Well, speaking of the speeches, we can't forget.
Not a villainous man, but for the sake of Rustin.
For the sake of that specific conversation. But speaking of the speeches, I do want to remind everyone that you also played one of the world's greatest orators in playing Dr. King as well.
Yes.
In Boycott. So as you prepared to take on that task, what do you remember the most about that process?
I remember that was a really full process. That experience, like the experience of working on American Fiction, was one that we did super passionately. And again, I'm going to use a cliche, but there was a lot of love on that set when we shot Boycott. Likewise, there was a lot of love when we shot American Fiction. We just came together. We just felt good about the story we were telling together, everyone. But that was a very full process because you can only use 14% of King's speeches for any, given that the estate has, so as I did with Basquiat, kind of trying to create these Frankensteinian versions of his paintings, I did with King's speeches. I would take bits from here, bits from there, and create, my own version of a King speech. So that was a great exercise. What I really appreciated, just from a performance perspective, though, about him when I tried to play that, man, that man had some breath. It was like, wow, trying to do those speeches with the power and kind of the cadence and the forcefulness that there was a wide kind of like sonar thing that he was putting out there, and to do that, the level of breath support was really intense. I wasn't prepared for it. And it's funny, when I did to prepare for it, unintentionally, it just fell into place that way, was I did Mark Antony in Julius Caesar in Central Park, right? Just before that. That was the best kind of preparation to play King, was to do, those two types of, do that oratory prior and then do his. But yeah, that was a good one. That was a good one. It was funny because, I don't look terribly like King. And I remember I said, Clark Johnson, who directed it, was like, yeah, I want you to play. I was like, bruh, now how long they play King, man? Come on, man. King's a different, he's a different brother. And he said, content of character, not by color. I said, oh, okay. Okay. But I tried to find the essence of him. And I also, again, I used to listen to his speeches at an album. I think they were remember when Stevie Wonder put out that album, Happy Birthday, and the speeches were on the back? Man, we wore the grooves out on that album in college, even. Yeah, even before I started acting, just listening to that stuff. I just loved it. I just loved the music of his speeches, the music of his language. And he was a brilliant writer. People, we used to study him back in school. Dr. Piazza, he would give us the first 18 lines of the, Canterbury Tales to recite. Juan Matapril with the short solta. He would give us King speeches and Lincoln as not just for oratory, but for the structure of their language and the syntax. King was, that was good fun. And again, a reminder of how we got here, a reminder of the history. You go on to stupid Twitter and you see people, boycott this, boycott that. And nobody boycott nothing. Those people boycotted those damn buses to get to work for months. Organized. Didn't I tell you we're not getting on that bus? When I tell you we're not, watch. Come on, man. We come from giants. Giant Americans. Pushing the country toward a more perfect union. That's why they don't want to teach you the history. Undoes the narrative. But anyway, so yeah, that was a great one. Great one to work on. Great one. Oh, thanks.
The power and the importance of our narrative in entertainment is continuing to tell those stories and making sure that they continue to be learned. But I want to ask you about a couple of other people that I guess technically are not our, they're not our real greats, but because they are folks that are such a part of our pop culture lexicon, I want to first ask you about Felix Leiter, playing in the James Bond universe 3 times.
Yeah.
When you have a character like that folks have, some knowledge of before, how do you ensure, and that one, you just get to play, and 2, that you kind of find something new and innovative in that?
Sure. Well, a lot of people wow, this year you got to lead here, you got to lead there, but you play these supporting. I like playing supporting roles sometimes. I like it for a couple of reasons. One, on a pragmatic level, when I had young kids, I didn't want to go away from home for a long time. If I could go do a smaller role, make enough to feed them and come back home, that was cool with me. Also, I like it because it doesn't stroke the ego. I like this. This has been, in some ways, this whole process, these moments where, don't forget where you came from. don't, this can be confusing work for some people sometimes, for me, anyone, where you lose sight of what grounds you. Playing a supporting role, sure. Yeah. Doesn't always have to be about me. Why? Plus, you calling me up to play the role that Jack Lord played? Jack Lord was bad. My agent called me up one day and said, yeah, so Jeffrey, the Bond people want to talk to you. They want to, they got to, they're going to refashion the series, and they want you to play, the CIA guy or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, send it over to me. Yeah. I'm like, he sends me a script. I'm like, Felix Leiter? Jack Lord? Come on, man, let's go. So yeah, I was, and it's funny because Daniel and I were actually doing a project at the time. I don't know if it was, I forget the sequence. We were doing a movie called Invasion. So I was with him when it all, at the beginning. And we were returning to a classic, Casino Royale, the opportunity to kind of revisit that and reshape it in a modern image. Yeah, I was excited about that. They were also incredibly gracious to me, the Broccoli's, Barbara Broccoli and Michael Wilson. My daughter was about 2 years old. My son was maybe 4 years old. We shot over in Prague. I was going to have to be over there for about 2 months. And it coincided with spring break for my son. He was young and in school, and they brought everyone over. People talk about big franchise. Yeah, it's a big, maybe the biggest franchise in the history of movies, but it's also a family business. And there was a sense of real care and intimacy on those sets. A lot of the crew have worked on many of the Bond films previously. It's like you coming back to the old company. And no, they were super gracious. And so, yeah, it was a good run. And I'll tell you, on the last one, spoiler alert, that scene in which, Felix goes down with the ship. Man, I don't know if I've ever had so much fun on a set in my life as dying in the belly of that ship. Man, that was so much fun. We were at Pinewood in the big tank out there. I forget how many hundreds of thousands of gallons this thing is. And the Corballs had built this rig, and it was absolutely ingenious, just brilliant. So it was the interior of the ship, and it would sink, and then it would list, and we had oxygen tanks at strategic places, but the whole thing just saying we could get full, and then it would fill up, and there were bubble effects and all of this stuff. It was brilliant, a brilliant piece of engineering. It was like, this is the stage for today? Okay. And I've talked about this all the time. What I love so much about this work, what I've grown to appreciate, is the collaboration, and not just with the other actors, with the director, but with everyone on a film set. And we look around and say, God damn, this is brilliant. These films aren't made by accident, but people of varied talents who all have a creative spark and a desire to tell this story together, doing it together, and enhancing one another's work as we do it. So yeah, I'll play on your set. And ideally, he looks at what we do and what we do inside of it and says, yeah, that was cool. That told the story. But oh man, I was literally grinning from ear to ear every take. Can we do another one? I mean, it was like the wildest amusement park ride. Only you could drown if you didn't know what you're doing. So maybe not open to the public, but it was so much fun. So much fun. Yeah.
Trained professionals only. And then I have to ask you also about Commissioner Gordon.
Yeah.
But you're right. At this point, but actually, seeing as we have the second film coming, what do we know? Does he become Commissioner Gordon in the second film?
I would imagine. I haven't read the script yet for the next, so I'm waiting patiently to return to Gotham. But that was one that I didn't expect either. But I was a massive fan of Batman. But beginning with the series, with the TV series, that was my introduction. And I was swept away by that stuff. I would come home and, make a bat cave out of pillows and the sofa and turn Channel 20, WDCA, the Batman. And it's a fascinating series, that one, because it's a series that captures audiences for some reason. That character, it's a detective story, but there's something about that character and those stories that just capture the imagination from 1939 until today. And so I was really pleased when I read the script. Matt Reeves, again, another one, extremely specific, smart, very clear vision in his head, and also really tight architecture. When he sent me the script, I was really pleased at what I read, because he was grounding the story in a contemporary way, and also a way that goes back to that golden age of cinema in the 70s. There kind of references to Taxi Driver and that genre, which I loved so much, in the film. And I also loved that he was modernizing the population of Gotham, because there was a little, here and there you hear, this term race swapping. Because I wonder, and I know the answer, but I do wonder who the person is. Because Bill Finger, Bob Kane wrote The Batman beginning in 1939. They lived in the Bronx. New York City was a different city. New York City was 95% white. Contemporary Gotham is fashioned after New York City. Contemporary New York City is a very different city. So I do wonder what type of person would think that any filmmaker worth his camera would want to recraft a Gotham for today and not populate it with people of color. Who looks around at any American city today and wishes it were populated by the demographic of 1939? And it's just like, dude. Anyway, it just. So I really like being a part of this Gotham that Matt has created. I love working with Rob. We found a thing, really big, partnership, and it was so cool. The first day we filmed the scene in which we discover the crime scene at the beginning of the movie, and I'd seen Rob in the cape and the cowl, seen him, but I hadn't seen him in the full suit until we got on stage. And he came walking on. It was like I was a kid again. I was a kid again. It was so cool. And God, man, that was not an easy shoot, with the COVID and everything on lockdown. It was tricky. And that thing is not easy to wear. Puts pressures on the back, and he just, he was a workhorse and never complained. Not once. I'd say, Rob, play, man. Come on. It's like, but man, what a, just went about it. Again, another guy. Yeah. Did that with a lot of grace. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good one. looking forward to getting back there.
Thank you for the grace with which you indulged us for 90 minutes. We are honored to be here in your presence to hear these stories and truly to continue to watch you along this mission that you set forth on all those years ago, and to bear witness to it. So thank you so much, Jeffrey Wright.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for listening. Thank you.